Hello. Today we'll explore how the descendants of Noah spread across the earth and how people, united in purpose, attempted to build the Tower of Babel. Through this story, we will learn about the dispersion of humanity and the confusion of languages. It also teaches us important lessons about God's will, human limitations, and the contrast between pride and obedience. Let's quiet our hearts and step into the story of the Bible. After the flood, Noah and his family began a new life. Through them, God repopulated the world. God said to Noah and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." It was God's will that people would spread out across the entire earth. However, the people wanted to stay together in one place, but God led each family group to expand and settle in different regions. Eventually, the descendants of Noah's three sons scattered across the world. God gave each group its own land and language, and they developed their own cultures and ways of life. The descendants of Japheth, Noah's eldest son, spread into the regions of Europe and Asia Minor. Among them were Gomer, Magog, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. They lived near the coastlines and prospered through maritime activities and trade. The descendants of Javan settled in the region of Greece and later crossed the seas to explore broader lands. Japheth's descendants were skilled in pioneering new territories, continuing trade and exploration across the seas. They lived with a spirit of wisdom, strategy, and adventure, always seeking new paths and opportunities. God had given them the ability to explore and pioneer. These descendants eventually became the ancestors of the Greeks, Romans, Spaniards, and other Western peoples. The descendants of Ham, Noah's second son, primarily moved into Africa and the land of Canaan. Among them were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. These people developed strong cultures and built thriving cities. Among the descendants of Cush was a mighty king named Nimrod. Nimrod was a great hunter and a powerful warrior. His kingdom began in the land of Shinar, including Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. From that region he expanded to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and the great city of Resen, which was between Nineveh and Calah. Nimrod gathered people and established a strong nation, and his name became widely known. However, he relied on his own strength and turned away from God, seeking human glory. His time marked a period of growing human pride. Mizraim became the father of the Ludites, Anamites, Lehabites, Naphtuhites, Pathrusites, Casluhites, and Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines came. Canaan had sons including Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth. He also became the ancestor of the Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Archites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. The territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon toward Gerar as far as Gaza, and then toward Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. Ham's descendants lived mainly in Africa and the Middle East. The Egyptians, Babylonians, and Canaanites came from the line of Ham. While they built great civilizations, many of them eventually turned away from God. The descendants of Shem formed the Hebrew people and various Eastern nations. Among them were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. They primarily lived in Mesopotamia and the Middle Eastern regions and became the ancestors of the Semitic peoples, including the nation of Israel. God especially chose to carry out his plan through the descendants of Shem. It is recorded that during the days of Peleg, one of Shem's descendants, the earth was divided. This indicates that humanity was gradually being separated into different nations. Thus, the descendants of Noah were scattered across the earth. God gave each people group their own language and culture, and they began to walk different paths in history. After the flood, the whole world had one language and a common speech. Since everyone spoke the same language, they could easily understand one another. The descendants of Noah continued to multiply and began to build more and more cities. As they moved eastward, they found a plain as the land of Shinar, modern-day Mesopotamia, and decided to settle there. It was a fertile land, ideal for farming. The people chose to stay in one place and build a great city. But in their hearts, there was a desire to glorify their own name rather than obey God. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. Let's use brick instead of stone and tar for mortar." Then they began to build a tower that grew higher and higher. "Let us build a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth," they said. They tried to achieve something great by their own strength and wisdom, without God. But this was not God's will. God saw what they were doing and said, "Look, they are one people, and they all have the same language. If they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan will be impossible for them." So God decided to confuse their language. Suddenly, they could no longer understand each other. Confusion broke out. "What are you saying? Why can't I understand you anymore?" they said. Because they could no longer communicate, they were unable to continue building the tower. People gathered into groups according to the languages they could understand, and they scattered to different regions of the earth. As a result, the world became filled with many languages, and humanity spread out across the land. The great tower they had tried to build became known as the Tower of Babel. Bible means confusion, and it was there that God disrupted human pride and scattered the people throughout the world. Following the story of the Tower of Babel, the remainder of Genesis chapter 11 records the genealogy of Shem's descendants. This genealogy specifically leads to Abram, who would later be renamed Abraham by God, the forefather of faith. Through Abraham, God would form the nation of Israel, and ultimately all nations would be blessed. This passage is a vital part of understanding how God's plan of salvation continued throughout history. After the flood, God established a new beginning with Noah and his family. Among them, Shem's lineage was chosen for a special purpose. When Shem was 100 years old, he had a son named Arphaxad. He lived another 500 years after Arphaxad was born and had many more children. Arphaxad became the father of Shelah at the age of 35 and lived 403 more years, continuing to have other children. Shelah, at the age of 30, became the father of Eber and lived another 403 years. Thus Shem's genealogy continued, and God's covenant flowed from one generation to the next. As time passed and generations came and went, God's plan steadily moved forward. Eber became the father of Peleg at age 34, and Peleg became the father of Roi at age 30. This line continued through Reu, Serug, Nahor, and finally Terah, making Terah the 10th generation from Noah. Terah had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Among them, Abram would become the one called by God for a special purpose. Yet his journey began in an ordinary family setting. Terah lived in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans. Ur was a prosperous city, rich in culture and economy, but it was also a place deeply influenced by idol worship. Terah's son Haran died at an early age, and his son Lot came to live with his grandfather Terah and his uncle Abram. Meanwhile, Abram married Sarai, but Sarai was unable to have children. In that society, continuing the family line was considered extremely important, yet Abram and Sarai had not been given that opportunity. Still, God had a great and marvelous plan that he intended to fulfill through them. One day Terah made a significant decision. Let us leave Ur of the Chaldeans and go to the land of Canaan. Canaan was far away, and leaving behind their familiar surroundings was not an easy choice. Nevertheless, Terah set out with his family and settled in a place called Haran. There he spent many years and eventually came to the end of his life. After Terah passed away in Haran, God spoke directly to Abram. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household and go to the land I will show you. Abram may have fallen into deep thought upon hearing these words. Leaving his homeland for an unknown place was surely not easy. Yet God promised that he would make Abram into a great nation and make his name great. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This marked the beginning of God's covenant and the first step in Abram's journey as the father of faith. Today we reflected on how the descendants of Shem continued and how Abram's family began a new journey. Through this story, we come to understand that God's plan is always unfolding, and he accomplishes great things through those he chooses. Though Abram did not yet know where he was going or what lay ahead, he chose to obey God's voice. Likewise, there are times when we must walk down paths we cannot fully see. But if God is the one guiding us, we can take each step with faith. Through Genesis chapters 10 and 11, we have learned about the dispersion of humanity and the origin of nations and languages. The descendants of Noah's 3 sons became the ancestors of many different peoples. And through the story of the Tower of Babel, we saw how languages were confused and people scattered across the earth. The Tower of Babel reveals the emptiness of human pride and the futility of trying to accomplish great things without God. God did not allow their efforts to exalt themselves and forget him to succeed. Instead, he confused their language and scattered them, giving rise to many nations and languages. Yet even in this, God continued his plan of salvation. From Shem's line came Abraham, through whom God would form the nation of Israel, and ultimately all nations would be blessed. This marks the beginning of God's plan to gather scattered humanity back to himself. Through the Bible, we see that God governs human history and accomplishes all things according to his will. Even though people may turn away from him and walk their own paths, God continues to carry out his plan of redemption. Now take a moment to quietly close your eyes and reflect on God's calling in your life. Consider what it means to follow his will. As you trust in this faithful God, may you have a peaceful and restful night. Thank you.